A poor teen helped an elderly neighbor. And what happened next shocked the entire town of Millfield. In a community where everyone struggled to get by, 17-year-old Alex Thompson's simple act of kindness would uncover secrets hidden for decades. What began as carrying groceries would trigger a chain of events so extraordinary that residents couldn't believe their eyes. No one could have predicted that this chance encounter would reveal a truth powerful enough to transform everything. This isn't just a story of unexpected friendship. It's the revelation that would leave an entire community speechless. Alex Thompson shivered as he walked home from his second job of the day, his worn sneakers splashing through puddles that hadn't yet formed into rivers. At 17, his shoulders already carried the weight of his family's financial struggles. His mother's medical bills had piled up in a cardboard box beneath the kitchen sink, and his father's factory job barely covered rent in their cramped Millfield apartment on the wrong side of town. One day at a time, he muttered to himself, clutching his backpack containing homework he'd have to tackle after midnight, fueled by cold coffee and sheer determination. Despite everything, despite the exhaustion, despite working nights at the grocery store and weekends at the car wash, despite skipping lunch more often than not, Alex maintained straight A's. They were his only possible ticket out of this dying town, his only hope for something better than the cycle that had trapped his parents. Millfield itself was a ghost of what it once was. The steel mill that had employed thousands had closed 15 years ago, leaving behind shuttered storefronts, abandoned factories, and a population that seemed to shrink with each passing year. Young people fled to the cities. Those who remained either gave up or fought desperately like Alex, refusing to accept that their zip code determined their destiny. Everyone in Millfield knew about the old Victorian house at the end of Maple Street. The one with overgrown hedges so thick you couldn't see through them, with windows that hadn't reflected sunlight in years, with a front porch that sagged like a tired old man's shoulders. And everyone knew about its sole occupant, Mr. Harrison. Stay away from that place. Alex's mother had warned him years ago, her voice dropping to the hushed tone people used when discussing dangerous things. That old man's not right in the head. There's something wrong with him. The rumors about Mr. Harrison had circulated through Millfield for decades, growing more elaborate with each retelling. Some said he'd killed someone in another state and was hiding from the law. Others whispered he was running from the government, that he'd stolen something valuable or knew dangerous secrets. The most common theory among the teenagers was that he'd simply gone mad after some unknown tragedy. A lost love, a dead child, a breakdown that had never healed. Whatever the truth, the elderly man had become Millfield's living ghost, seen only occasionally through clouded windows or shuffling to the corner store once a month with his collar turned up and his eyes fixed on the ground. The kids at school had dared each other to approach his house. None had succeeded. Even the mailman delivered packages to the curb rather than the door. It was as if the entire town had collectively decided that Mr. Harrison was best left alone, undisturbed in his self-imposed exile. But tonight was different. The sky had opened up without any warning, unleashing sheets of rain so heavy that visibility dropped to mere feet. The storm had come from nowhere, transforming the quiet evening into something violent and unforgiving. Streets became rivers. The gutters overflowed. Thunder cracked so loudly that car alarms triggered blocks away. As Alex rounded the corner near the grocery store, still a mile from home, he spotted a hunched figure struggling with multiple grocery bags, their contents spilling onto the flooded sidewalk. Cans rolled into the street. A loaf of bread was already soaked through. The old man was bent nearly double, his thin jacket completely inadequate against the downpour, his weathered hands trembling as he desperately tried to gather the scattered items. Without thinking, without calculating whether it was safe or smart or worth the risk. Alex rushed over, his own backpack already heavy with books and his own problems. "Let me help you with that, sir." When the man looked up, water streaming down his face, Alex found himself staring into the most piercing blue eyes he'd ever seen. They were startling in their intensity, completely at odds with the disheveled appearance of Millfield's infamous recluse. Mr. Harrison's gaze held something unexpected and contradictory. Fierce pride battling with desperate need, intelligence warring with exhaustion. "I don't need charity," the old man snapped. But his voice cracked as another bag split open, spilling milk and eggs onto the wet concrete. He bent to retrieve them, moving stiffly as if his joints protested every motion. Alex persisted, already collecting the scattered groceries. "It's not charity, sir. That storm's getting worse. Please, let me help you home. You can't carry all this alone, not in this weather." Something in the old man broke then. Perhaps the realization that his stubborn independence couldn't withstand nature's fury. Or perhaps he was simply too tired to fight anymore. With a barely perceptible nod, he allowed Alex to gather the remaining groceries and organize them into bags that wouldn't fall apart. They began walking, Alex matching his pace to the old man's slower shuffle. The wind whipped around them, nearly knocking them sideways. Mr. Harrison said nothing, but Alex noticed him wincing with each step, as if the walk was causing him physical pain. As they approached the infamous house at the end of Maple Street, Alex's heart pounded, so hard he could hear it over the storm. The Victorian structure loomed before them, its paint peeling like dead skin, its windows dark and impenetrable. No teenager in Millfield had crossed that threshold in living memory. The house had become almost mythical in the town's collective consciousness, a place of mystery and danger, best avoided. The porch steps creaked beneath their feet, groaning under their combined weight as if complaining about the intrusion. Mr. Harrison's hands shook noticeably as he fumbled with ancient keys, his fingers so cold they could barely grip the metal. Finally, the door opened, and they stepped into darkness. But helping the old man home was just the beginning. What Alex found inside that house would leave him questioning everything he thought he knew about the man the town had feared for years, and would set in motion events that would ultimately transform not just his life, but the entire community of Millfield. The interior of the house was nothing like Alex had imagined. He'd expected darkness, decay, and filth, the physical manifestation of madness and neglect that the town's rumors had painted so vividly. Instead, he found himself stepping into a surprisingly well-maintained Victorian home, filled with warm lamplight from brass fixtures and the faint scent of old books, furniture polish, and something else. Something like lavender and time itself. Come in," Mr. Harrison said, his voice losing some of its harshness now that they were out of the storm, sheltered within these mysterious walls. "Don't drip water all over the hardwood. There are towels in that closet to your left. The good ones, not the threadbare ones." Alex quickly found towels and began drying off, taking in his surroundings with growing astonishment that bordered on disbelief. The walls were lined with bookshelves, hundreds, perhaps thousands of books, their spines creating a rainbow of colors and ages. Some appeared to be first editions, their leather covers worn smooth by countless readings. A grand piano occupied one corner of the living room, its surface dust-free and polished to a shine that reflected the lamplight like a mirror. The furniture, though old and clearly from another era, was elegant and meticulously maintained. Doilies adorned the armrests of wing-back chairs. The Persian rug beneath their feet was intricate and valuable looking, its colors still vibrant despite obvious age. This wasn't the home of a madman. This was the home of someone cultured, educated, and deliberate in their choices. Someone who had once cared deeply about beauty and order, and who apparently still did, despite his self-imposed isolation. "Thank you," Mr. Harrison said quietly, setting the soggy groceries carefully on the kitchen counter, organizing them with the precision of someone accustomed to structure and routine. "I don't usually accept help. I don't usually accept much of anything from people anymore. It's been a long time since I've let anyone into this house." "Why not?" Alex asked, then immediately regretted the bluntness of the question. He was treading into territory that was clearly painful, and he barely knew this man. "Sorry, that's none of my business. I shouldn't have asked." The old man studied him for a long moment, his piercing blue eyes seeming to look through Alex rather than at him, as if assessing something fundamental about his character. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested he was making some kind of important decision, a choice that had consequences. "What's your name, boy?" "Alex Thompson. I live a few blocks over on Elm Street in the apartment complex near the park." "I'm Harrison. Just Harrison. Not Mr. Harrison. I stopped being a Mr. a long time ago. That title belonged to a different person, someone I used to be." He moved slowly to the kitchen table and sat down heavily, as if the walk from the store had completely exhausted him. His breathing was labored, and Alex noticed a slight tremor in his hands as he gripped the edge of the table. "You go to Millfield High?" "Senior year," Alex confirmed, pulling out a chair and sitting across from him. "I'm hoping to graduate early if I can get my independent studies approved." "Good student?" "I try to be. I work 2 jobs, so it's not always easy. But I maintain a 4.0 GPA. I need scholarships to get out of Millfield, so grades are kind of everything for me." Harrison nodded slowly, a flicker of something, recognition, perhaps, or empathy, crossing his weathered features. "Your mother works at the hospital, doesn't she? Nursing?" Alex was startled, his body going rigid. "How did you know that?" "This town is smaller than you think, Alex. Much smaller. People talk even about things they think they're keeping secret. I hear things. I know things. The grocer mentions your mother's medical bills when he's making change. The pharmacist talks about her prescription refills. Small towns have long memories and loose tongues." Harrison gestured toward the chair Alex was already sitting in. "Sit. You look like you could use a warm drink. You're shivering, and it's not just from the cold." Before Alex could respond, Harrison stood again, moving to the kitchen with surprising grace despite his apparent frailty. He began preparing tea with practiced efficiency, retrieving a ceramic teapot from a shelf, selecting loose tea leaves from a tin, measuring them with precision. His movements in the kitchen were fluid and graceful, completely at odds with his shuffling gait outside. There was a contradiction here, a duality that fascinated and confused Alex in equal measure. This man seemed to contain multitudes, as if he were several different people occupying the same aging body. "Your father worked at the mill before it closed?" Harrison continued, pouring hot water over the tea leaves, the steam rising in delicate spirals. "Before the company moved operations to Mexico and left this entire town to rot?" "Yes. How?" "I told you. I know things." Harrison set a steaming cup in front of Alex, and Alex noticed that the tea was served in fine china, the kind his grandmother had kept for special occasions. "He drives a truck now, doesn't he? Long hauls, gone for weeks at a time. That's why your mother works so much, to keep the household going while he's on the road. Alex nodded slowly, unsettled by this stranger's intimate knowledge of his family's private struggles. It felt like a violation somehow, though Harrison's tone wasn't malicious. It was merely factual, stated with the certainty of someone who had observed much and forgotten little. "Mr. Harrison, or just Harrison, how do you know all this? Have you been watching us or something?" The old man sat back down, cradling his own cup of tea in weathered hands that trembled slightly. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared into the steam rising from his drink, watching it dissipate into the air like memories fading into time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, sadder, carrying the accumulated weight of decades of regret and isolation. "Because I used to be someone important, Alex. Before I became the town's favorite ghost story, before I became the cautionary tale mothers tell their children, I was someone people knew, someone people respected, someone who mattered." He paused, taking a sip of his tea, seeming to gather strength for what he was about to say. "I was a teacher here once. For 37 years, I taught history at Millfield High. I knew every student's family, every student's story. I knew their parents, their grandparents. I was woven into the fabric of this community." "You were a teacher?" Alex couldn't hide his surprise. "What happened? Why did you stop?" Harrison looked up, and Alex saw something break behind those piercing blue eyes, something fundamental and irreparable. "Then I made a choice that cost me everything. A choice I've been paying for ever since. A choice that wasn't really a choice at all, but the consequences were just the same." Before Alex could ask what he meant, a loud crack of thunder shook the entire house, rattling windows and causing the old structure to creak in protest. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died completely, plunging them into darkness broken only by the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the room in stark, ghostly white, revealing details in sharp relief before returning them to shadow. "The storm's worse than I thought," Harrison said calmly, as if the power outage was nothing unusual, merely an inconvenience he'd encountered many times before. He stood and moved with surprising certainty through the darkness, retrieving a flashlight from a drawer as if he'd prepared for this exact scenario. "You can't go home in this weather. The roads will be flooded, and it's not safe. You'll stay here tonight. It's not a request or an offer. It's practical." It wasn't a question. And despite every warning his mother had ever given him, despite every rumor that had circulated through Millfield High about the mysterious man in the Victorian house, despite every instinct that screamed caution, Alex found himself nodding in agreement. Because something about Harrison, something beneath the mystery and the strangeness, something fundamental and true, felt genuine, trustworthy, real. "There's a guest room upstairs," Harrison continued, the flashlight beam dancing across the walls as he moved toward the staircase. "First door on the left. There are clean sheets on the bed, fresh pillows, and you'll find spare clothes in the dresser. My grandson was about your size once upon a time. The clothes have been stored carefully, but they should still be wearable." "Was," Alex noted silently. Past tense. Another mystery, another layer to unravel, another piece of the puzzle that was Harrison. As Harrison led him upstairs, the beam of the flashlight dancing across walls covered in framed photographs, Alex caught glimpses of images that told fragments of a story. Harrison as a younger man in various settings, with different people, at what appeared to be important events. In one photograph, he stood beside a beautiful woman who looked like she might have been his wife, both of them smiling broadly at what appeared to be a wedding or anniversary celebration. In another, he held a small boy with the same piercing blue eyes, the child laughing with uninhibited joy. There were photos of Harrison receiving awards, standing before classrooms full of students, at what appeared to be academic conferences or educational events. But what struck Alex most profoundly was the absence. The empty spaces on the walls where photographs had clearly once hung, leaving only faded rectangles of paint. Ghosts of images that had been deliberately removed. Whatever story these walls could tell, it was incomplete. Deliberately curated, carefully edited to remove certain narratives, certain people, certain moments that had apparently become too painful to look at. The guest room was surprisingly comfortable, with a 4-poster bed covered in a quilt that looked handmade, a small desk with writing materials, and a window that overlooked the overgrown garden at the back of the property. Harrison left him with a flashlight and a promise that he'd leave a candle on the nightstand in case the power didn't return before morning. That night, lying in the guest bed in the darkness, listening to the storm rage outside with primal fury, watching lightning illuminate the room at irregular intervals, Alex couldn't sleep. His mind spun with questions that multiplied faster than he could process them. Who was Harrison, really? What had happened to him? Why did he live like a hermit in this beautiful, lonely house? What choice had he made that had cost him everything? What had happened to his grandson? And most importantly, why had he let Alex in? Why had he broken his apparent isolation for a teenager he'd never met before? The next morning, when Alex woke to pale sunlight filtering through the windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor, he would discover that the answers to these questions would be far more complicated, far more painful, and far more significant than he could possibly have imagined. Because Harrison's story wasn't just about one man's tragedy. It wasn't simply about a personal loss or a private failure. It was about a secret that had shaped the entire town of Millfield. A secret that had been buried for decades. A secret that had affected countless lives. A secret that was about to come to light and change everything. And Alex Thompson, a poor 17-year-old working 2 jobs just to survive, was about to become the catalyst for that revelation. Alex woke to the smell of fresh coffee and bacon frying in a cast-iron skillet. For a moment, he was disoriented, caught between sleep and wakefulness, unsure of where he was or how he'd gotten there. The unfamiliar ceiling with its ornate plaster molding seemed to belong to another world entirely. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back in vivid detail. The storm, the old man struggling with groceries, the mysterious Victorian house filled with books and secrets and decades of accumulated solitude. He checked his phone. 7:47 a.m. The screen displaying a low battery warning in angry red letters. His mother would definitely be worried by now. He'd never stayed out all night without telling her, never missed a shift or failed to check in. But when he tried to turn on his phone to call her, he found the battery completely dead. Drained by the constant searching for signal in the storm, the phone's desperate attempts to connect to towers that had been knocked offline by lightning and wind. Downstairs, Harrison was moving about the kitchen with surprising energy and grace, preparing a full breakfast as if entertaining a guest in his home were a normal, everyday occurrence, rather than something that hadn't happened in years. Eggs scrambled with herbs, crispy bacon arranged on a plate lined with paper towels, toast with homemade jam made from what looked like homegrown berries, fresh fruit, strawberries, blueberries, sliced peaches, arranged artfully on a ceramic plate with an intricate blue pattern. The power had returned sometime during the night, and warm light flooded through the windows, revealing the house in full daylight for the first time. showing every detail that darkness had hidden, every corner that shadow had obscured. "Good morning," Harrison said, not looking up from the stove where he was attending to a pot of oatmeal with the careful attention of someone who took pride in his cooking. "I assumed you'd be hungry. Teenagers always are. Your metabolisms are like furnaces, burning through fuel at an alarming rate. Sit down. Breakfast is ready. Everything's still hot." Alex sat at the kitchen table, which was set with cloth napkins and napkin rings, real silverware polished to a shine, and cloth placemats that looked handmade. This level of formality felt strange, almost surreal, like stepping into a time period that had largely disappeared from the modern world. "Thank you. This is really nice, really thoughtful. My mom usually just makes cereal or toast before work. Sometimes she's so tired she forgets to eat breakfast at all." "Your mother works too hard," Harrison said, setting a plate in front of Alex with the care of someone serving in a fine restaurant. "She should be resting, should be taking care of herself. But she doesn't. She exhausts herself because she feels responsible for you, for your father, for everyone around her. But then, that's the nature of desperation, isn't it? When you're drowning, when you're struggling to keep your head above water, you don't have the luxury of pacing yourself. You just keep moving, keep working, keep pushing until your body finally gives out." They ate in silence for several minutes. The only sound the clink of silverware against china, the soft scrape of butter knife on toast, the occasional sip of coffee. Alex found himself relaxing slightly, the tension in his shoulders easing as he ate food that was prepared with obvious care and skill. Finally, unable to ignore the growing anxiety in his chest, Alex spoke. "I need to call my mother," he said, setting down his fork. "She'll be worried sick. She'll think something happened to me. I should have called last night, but the storm was so bad, and I didn't think—" "There's a phone in the study," Harrison said, gesturing with his coffee cup. "A landline. The cell towers are probably still down from the storm anyway. Lightning strikes can knock out infrastructure for hours, sometimes days. First door on the right, past the living room. You can't miss it." Alex found the study easily, a room even more impressive than the living room, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that stretched from the hardwood floor to the high ceiling, a massive oak desk that looked like it had been carved by master craftsmen, and a leather wingback chair that looked like it belonged in a museum or university library. The walls were a deep burgundy, and the room smelled of old paper, leather bindings, and something indefinably intellectual. The phone was an old rotary model, the kind Alex had only seen in his grandmother's house before she passed away, the kind that belonged to a different era entirely. He dialed his mother's number, which he knew by heart despite living in an age of contact lists and digital storage. She answered on the second ring, her voice tight with worry and barely controlled panic. "Alex? Where are you? You didn't come home last night. I stayed up all night waiting for you. I was about to call the police. I was terrified that something had happened to you, that you'd been in an accident in the storm, that—" "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I got caught in the storm and—" "Are you safe? Where are you? Just tell me where you are right now." Alex hesitated, knowing how this would sound, knowing what her reaction would be. He was right to hesitate. "I'm at the old Harrison house, on Maple Street. I helped an old man get home during the storm, and he let me stay until it passed. He made me breakfast. I'm completely safe, I promise." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, so long that Alex thought the connection might have been lost. He could almost hear his mother's mind working through the implications, weighing her worry against the practicality of his situation, considering what this meant and what she should do about it. Finally she spoke, her voice strained. The Harrison house. Alex, do you know what people say about that man? Do you know the rumors that have circulated about him for decades? I know what people say, Mom, but he's not what they say. He's actually really kind. He's intelligent and thoughtful and careful. He made me breakfast. He gave me a clean bed and dry clothes. I'm fine, I promise you. I'm completely fine. Another silence, longer this time, stretching between them like a rubber band pulled to its limit. Alex could almost hear his mother's mind working, could almost see her sitting at the kitchen table in their cramped apartment, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold hours ago. Finally, she spoke. What's his name? The man's name? His full name? Just Harrison. He said to call him Harrison, not Mr. Harrison. He used to teach at Millfield High. He taught history for a long time. Again, a pause. But this time it was different. This time it was filled with recognition, with memory, with something deeper than mere worry. Harrison? Not David Harrison? Alex felt a chill run down his spine, a sudden awareness that he was touching something significant, something that went deeper than he'd realized. You know him? I might have known of him a long time ago. Before you were born. Before... She trailed off, her voice becoming distant, as if she were looking back across decades to a time she'd tried hard to forget. Alex, I want you to come home. Right now. I want you to leave that house immediately. Why? What's wrong? Mom, you're scaring me. What's the connection? Just do it, Alex, please. I'll explain when you get home. I promise I'll explain everything, but right now I need you to leave that house. Now. Mom. Now, Alex. The line went dead. Not disconnected, dead. As if his mother had hung up on him mid-conversation, as if she couldn't bear to hear another word, as if the sound of his voice was causing her physical pain. When Alex returned to the kitchen, Harrison was washing dishes with methodical care, his weathered hands moving through the soapy water with practiced efficiency. His movements were precise and practiced, the movements of someone who had spent decades living alone, developing routines and rituals that structured his days. He didn't need to ask what the phone call had revealed. He seemed to already know, seemed to have been expecting this moment, waiting for it with the patience of someone who had learned to wait for things a very long time ago. Your mother told you to leave, Harrison said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the certainty of someone who understood how these conversations went, who had perhaps played out this exact scenario in his mind 1,000 times. How did you know? Because your mother is one of the few people in this town who knows the truth, or at least part of it. She knows enough to be afraid for you. She knows enough to understand why I live the way I do, why I've isolated myself. Harrison dried his hands on a towel with slow, deliberate movements. He turned to face Alex, and his expression was grave, resolved, as if he'd been waiting for this moment for a very long time, as if he'd prepared himself for this conversation and was finally ready to have it. I think it's time you knew who I really am, who I was, and what happened to this town, what happened to me, and why. They moved to the living room, where Harrison settled into one of the wingback chairs with a wince of pain that suggested his body was reminding him of its age and fragility. Alex sat across from him, his heart pounding with anticipation and dread, with a sense that he was about to learn something that would change how he understood his town, his mother, and the world around him. I was a teacher, Harrison began, his voice taking on the cadence of someone telling a story they'd rehearsed in their mind 1,000 times, but never actually spoken aloud. a story that had been locked inside them for so long that speaking it felt like breaking a seal, like releasing something that had been under pressure for decades. As I mentioned last night, I taught American history at Millfield High for 37 years. I was good at it. Everyone said so. I cared about my students, genuinely cared about making history come alive for them, about teaching them to think critically about the world around them, about understanding how the choices made by previous generations shaped the present moment. He paused, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else, as if they were artifacts from a different life, evidence of a person he no longer recognized. In 1989, I had a student named Michael Chen. Brilliant boy, absolutely brilliant. Top of his class, and not just academically. He was brilliant in the way that certain young people are brilliant, with a kind of intellectual curiosity and moral clarity that made everyone around him better. He was accepted to Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, full scholarships everywhere. He was going to be the first person from Millfield in generations to escape this town and make something of himself, to go out into the world and do important things. Harrison's voice cracked slightly, and he paused to collect himself, to push through the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. Michael was also gay. This was 1989, Alex. This was before the internet, before social media, before any of the acceptance and visibility we have now. In Millfield, in this conservative working-class town, being gay was something you hid, something you were ashamed of, something that could destroy your life if people found out. What happened to him? Alex asked quietly, though he was beginning to suspect the answer, beginning to understand that this story was going to be tragic, that it was going to explain the empty photographs on the walls, the isolation, the decades of self-imposed exile. He fell in love, Harrison said, and his voice carried the weight of that revelation like a stone. With another student, a boy named Tommy Garrett. Tommy's father was the police chief. His family was prominent, respected, powerful in this town. They were the kind of family that didn't have to follow the same rules as everyone else. And when Tommy's father found out about the relationship, found out that his son was gay, that he was in love with another boy, he didn't accept it. He couldn't accept it. His son was supposed to be normal, supposed to carry on the family legacy, supposed to live the life that had been predetermined for him. Harrison stood and walked to one of the bookshelves, running his fingers along the spines of the books as if drawing strength from them, as if they were old friends who understood his pain. Tommy's father came to me. He was a parent of one of my former students, and he came to my house one evening. It was raining that night too, I remember. He stood on my porch, water dripping from his coat, and he told me that Michael Chen had corrupted his son, that I, as a teacher, had a responsibility to do something about it. He implied, very clearly implied, that if I didn't do something, there would be consequences. For me, for my career, for my family. What did you do? Alex asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer, though he could already see the shape of the tragedy that was coming. I did nothing, Harrison said, and his voice was hollow with the weight of that inaction, hollow with the knowledge of what that nothing had cost. I was afraid. I was afraid for my job, afraid for my reputation, afraid of the social consequences of standing up for a gay student in a town that wasn't ready to accept that people like Michael existed, that wasn't ready to acknowledge that sexuality was something other than a choice, a sin, a perversion. So I stayed silent. I said nothing to the administration, nothing to Michael, nothing to anyone. I told myself that it wasn't my place, that I was a teacher, not a counselor, that I didn't have the right to interfere in students' personal lives. But the truth was that I was just afraid. He turned back to face Alex, and his eyes were wet with tears that had accumulated over decades, tears that had been waiting to fall for a very long time. A week later, Michael Chen was dead. Suicide. He left a note saying he couldn't live a lie anymore, couldn't hide who he was, couldn't bear the weight of shame and secrecy, the constant fear of discovery and rejection. He took his mother's sleeping pills and never woke up. He was 17 years old. Alex felt his stomach turn, felt something inside him break in sympathy for a boy he'd never known, but who suddenly felt very real, very present in the room with them. Oh my God. I'm so sorry. That's horrible. The official story was that he was depressed about college choices, that it had nothing to do with his sexuality. The town accepted that narrative because it was easier, because it didn't require anyone to examine their own complicity, because accepting the truth would have meant confronting uncomfortable realities about who they were and what they'd allowed to happen. Tommy Garrett's father was never questioned. I was never questioned. And Michael Chen became just another statistic, another tragic loss that everyone moved on from, another name in a long list of young people who couldn't survive the weight of their own existence. But you didn't move on, Alex said, beginning to understand the shape of Harrison's life, the architecture of his isolation. No, Harrison agreed, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't. I spent the next 30 years teaching. But I was a hollow man. I taught history while being a coward about the history I'd witnessed. I taught critical thinking while having failed to think critically about my own moral responsibility. I taught my students about the Holocaust, about slavery, about all the great moral failures of history, while knowing that I had failed a moral test when it mattered most. And then, about 8 years ago, my grandson, Michael's younger brother, came to visit me. Alex's breath caught. Your grandson? My daughter married Michael's uncle, Harrison explained. They had a son together, a beautiful, intelligent boy who was also gay. And he came to me asking for advice, asking how to navigate being different in a world that didn't accept him, asking if there was a way to live authentically without destroying himself. And I realized that I had a second chance. A chance to do what I should have done for Michael all those years ago. A chance to be the person I'd failed to be. Harrison moved to the wall where the empty photograph spaces were visible. Faded rectangles of paint that marked where images had once hung. I told my grandson everything. I told him about Michael, about my failure, about the price of silence and cowardice. And I told him that I would support him, that I would stand with him, that he didn't have to hide who he was, that love was never shameful, no matter what form it took, no matter what anyone else said. What happened? Alex asked, his voice tight with emotion. He came out, Harrison said, to his parents, to his school, to the world. He was brave in a way that I never was. He decided that living authentically was worth the risk, that being true to himself was more important than conforming to other people's expectations. And my daughter couldn't accept it. She told me I was poisoning her son's mind, that I was encouraging him to make choices that would ruin his life, that I was repeating the same mistakes that had led to Michael's death. She cut off contact with me. We haven't spoken in 7 years. He sat back down heavily, as if the weight of those 7 years was suddenly pressing down on him. So I came here, to this house, and I locked myself away. I couldn't undo what I'd done, or failed to do with Michael. But I could at least stop hurting the people I loved by association. I could remove myself from their lives and let them move on without the burden of my guilt, without having to explain to their friends why they were associated with the town pariah. But you didn't stop there, Alex said, beginning to understand, beginning to see the full picture of Harrison's life. You started helping people, quietly, from behind closed doors. I did what I could, Harrison said. I helped LGBTQ youth in this town who needed support, who needed someone to believe in them when the world was telling them they were wrong, that they were sick, that they should be ashamed. I gave scholarships anonymously to students who were being held back by poverty, who had the potential to do great things but didn't have the resources. I tried in small ways to atone for my silence, to make amends for Michael's death by helping others who were in similar situations. But it was never enough. It could never be enough. No amount of good deeds could undo what I'd failed to do when it mattered most. Why did you tell me all this? Alex asked, his mind reeling with the weight of what he'd just learned, trying to process how this story connected to his mother, to his own life, to the town he'd lived in his entire life. Because you remind me of Michael, Harrison said. Because you're at a crossroads, and I don't want you to make the same mistakes I did. Because this town is full of people like you, struggling, talented, desperate to escape. And they need allies. They need people who will speak up, who will stand with them, who won't choose silence over courage. Because your generation has a chance to do better than mine did, to be braver, to be more honest, to create a world where people don't have to hide who they are. Harrison leaned forward, his piercing blue eyes intense and focused. And because your mother was Michael's best friend, she was the only person who tried to help him, who didn't abandon him when he came out to her. She was 16 years old, and she had more courage than I did at 45. She stood by him when everyone else turned away. She left Millfield for a while after Michael died, trying to escape the pain, trying to find a place where she could heal. But she came back. She came back to help other people, to make sure that no one else would be forgotten the way Michael was forgotten, to work as a nurse in a town that had broken her heart, because she believed that helping people was more important than her own pain. Alex felt tears streaming down his face, hot and sudden, tears that came from a place deep inside him that he hadn't known existed. His mother had never told him any of this. She'd never mentioned Michael, never explained why she worked so hard, never shared the weight she'd been carrying all these years, the burden of grief and guilt and the determination to make a difference. I need to go home, Alex said, standing up abruptly. I need to talk to my mother. I need to understand what this all means. Of course, Harrison said. But Alex, when you do, tell her that I'm sorry. Tell her that I finally found the courage I should have had all those years ago. Tell her that I've spent the last 8 years trying to be the person I should have been when it mattered most. And tell her that I'm proud of her. Tell her that Michael would be proud of her too. Tell her that what she's done, the lives she's touched, the people she's helped, the difference she's made, it matters. It all matters. As Alex walked home through the clear morning light, his mind reeling with new understanding, with the weight of revelation and connection, he realized that the rumors about Harrison had been both completely true and completely false. He was a broken man, yes. But he was broken by his own conscience, not by madness. He was broken by the knowledge of what he'd failed to do, by the weight of a silence that had cost a young man his life. And in his brokenness, he had found a kind of redemption, not forgiveness, because he didn't believe he deserved that, but purpose. A reason to keep living, to keep trying, to keep fighting for the people he'd failed so long ago, to try to prevent other tragedies from happening. And Alex realized that he too had a choice to make. He could stay silent, like Harrison had. He could accept the world as it was, could conform to the expectations of a town that wasn't ready for change, could prioritize his own comfort and safety above his principles. Or he could speak up. He could be the person that Michael Chen never got to be. He could be the ally that his mother had tried to be, and that Harrison had finally become. He could use his voice, his intelligence, his position as a student to make a difference, to create a world where other young people wouldn't have to hide who they were, where they wouldn't have to choose between authenticity and survival. The question was, would he have the courage to do it? The apartment was quiet when Alex arrived home, too quiet. The kind of silence that comes before a storm. His mother was sitting at the kitchen table in her work scrubs, still wearing the badge from the hospital clipped to her collar. Her hands were wrapped around a mug of coffee that had probably gone cold an hour ago. She looked up when he entered, and Alex was struck by how tired she looked. How the weight of decades seemed to be pressing down on her shoulders, aging her beyond her years. "Sit down," she said quietly. It wasn't a request. Alex sat across from her, his backpack still slung over one shoulder. He waited, knowing that his mother needed time to gather her thoughts, to find the words for something she'd clearly been avoiding for a very long time. "I haven't thought about Michael Chen in years," she began, her voice distant, as if she were looking back across time to a place she'd tried hard to forget. "Or rather, I've tried not to think about him. But his name is always there, you know? Always in the back of my mind. Always a part of me, even after all this time." "Tell me about him," Alex said gently. "Tell me about your friendship." His mother took a long breath, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Michael was my best friend. We met in 7th grade, and we were inseparable from that moment on. He was so smart, Alex. Smarter than anyone I've ever known, before or since. But it wasn't just academic intelligence. He had this way of understanding people, of seeing into their hearts, of knowing what they needed even before they knew it themselves." She paused, staring into her cold coffee as if it held answers. "In our junior year of high school, Michael told me he was gay. I was the first person he told. He was terrified, absolutely terrified. He thought I would reject him, that I would stop being his friend. But I couldn't have done that, even if I'd wanted to. He was my best friend. That didn't change just because he was attracted to boys instead of girls." "What about other people?" Alex asked. "How did they react?" "Most people didn't know," his mother said. "Michael was careful. He had to be. This was 1989, Alex. The world was very different then. AIDS was ravaging the gay community, and there was so much fear, so much hatred. People were terrified of gay people, or they pretended to be. Michael knew that if people found out, his life would be over. His college plans, his dreams, everything would be destroyed." She took a sip of her cold coffee and grimaced. "But then he fell in love with Tommy Garrett. And suddenly, being careful wasn't enough anymore. Suddenly, Michael wanted to live. Really live. Not just survive in hiding. He wanted to be honest about who he was and who he loved." "What happened?" Alex asked, though he already knew the answer. "Tommy's father found out," his mother said, her voice becoming harder, edged with anger that had been simmering for 30 years. "Chief Garrett. He came to the school, made a huge scene, threatened to have Michael arrested for corrupting his son. He went to the principal, to the school board, to anyone who would listen. He said Michael was a predator. that he was trying to recruit Tommy into a homosexual lifestyle, that he needed to be removed from the school immediately. "What did the school do?" Alex asked. "Nothing official," his mother said bitterly. But they didn't need to do anything official. The damage was done. Rumors spread. People started treating Michael differently. His teachers started questioning his work, suggesting that maybe he wasn't as smart as everyone thought. Students who had been friendly started avoiding him. And through it all, Michael tried to keep going. He tried to act like nothing had changed, like he was still the same person everyone had known before. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. "I tried to help him. I really did. I told him that it didn't matter what people said, that he was still brilliant, still worthy, still deserving of love and happiness. But I was just a teenager, and I didn't have the power to change what was happening. I couldn't protect him from the cruelty of our town." "What about Mr. Harrison?" Alex asked carefully. "What role did he play in all of this?" His mother turned back to face him, and her expression was complicated, a mixture of understanding and lingering hurt. Mr. Harrison was Michael's history teacher. Michael loved his class. He said Mr. Harrison was the only teacher who made him feel like his thoughts mattered, like he was more than just a statistic or a problem to be solved. Michael went to him for advice about what was happening. He asked Mr. Harrison what he should do, how he should handle the situation. "And what did Mr. Harrison say?" Alex asked, though he already knew the answer. "He said nothing," his mother said quietly. Michael came back to school the next day devastated. He said Mr. Harrison had told him it wasn't his place to get involved, that Michael needed to handle it on his own. And that was the moment Michael gave up. Alex felt something break inside him. "Mom, I think you need to know what Mr. Harrison told me this morning." Over the next hour, Alex recounted everything that Harrison had said. The story of Michael's death, the decades of guilt and isolation, the attempt at redemption through helping other LGBTQ+ youth, the estrangement from his daughter. His mother listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from pain to understanding to something that looked like forgiveness. When he finished, she was silent for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "I've spent 30 years being angry at Mr. Harrison. I blamed him for Michael's death. I thought that if he had just said something, if he had just stood up for Michael, everything would have been different. And maybe it would have been. But hearing that he spent all these years trying to atone for that silence, I don't know what to do with that information." "Do you think you could forgive him?" Alex asked. His mother looked at her son, and there was something new in her eyes, a kind of weary wisdom that came from having carried pain for a very long time. "I don't know if forgiveness is the right word, but I think I can understand him now. I think I can see that he's been punishing himself far more severely than I ever could have. And maybe that's enough." She stood up and walked to her bedroom, returning a few minutes later with a photograph. It showed two teenagers, a boy and a girl, laughing at something outside the frame of the camera. The boy had kind eyes and an intelligent expression. The girl was Alex's mother, younger and happier than he'd ever seen her. "That's Michael," she said, pointing to the boy. "That's my best friend. That's the person I failed to save." "You didn't fail him," Alex said. "You were there for him. You were the only person who was." "But it wasn't enough," his mother said. "And that's something I've had to live with. That's something I'll always have to live with." She put the photograph away carefully. "But you know what? I've tried to make sure that other people have what Michael didn't have. I've tried to be the ally, the supporter, the person who stands up and says, "This is wrong." I work at the hospital because I want to help people. I work so hard because I want to make sure that no one else has to suffer the way Michael did. I know, Alex said. And it matters, Mom. What you do matters. His mother reached across the table and took his hand. I need you to promise me something, Alex. I need you to promise that you'll never stay silent when you see injustice. I need you to promise that you'll be braver than Mr. Harrison was, braver than I was when I was your age. I need you to promise that you'll use your voice to help people who can't help themselves. I promise, Alex said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. That afternoon, Alex sat down at his computer and started writing. He wrote about Michael Chen, about the silence that had killed him, about the way that small towns could crush people who didn't fit into their narrow definitions of normal. He wrote about his mother's courage and Mr. Harrison's guilt and the price of inaction. He wrote about the LGBTQ+ students at Millfield High who were struggling in silence, who were afraid to be themselves, who were living in fear of discovery and rejection. He sent the essay to the school newspaper. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Some people were supportive, praising him for his courage and his honesty. But others were angry. Parents called the school demanding that Alex be punished. The principal called him into her office and suggested that maybe the essay was too controversial for the school newspaper. But Alex stood firm. He had made a promise to his mother, to Michael's memory, to himself. The essay was published. And then something unexpected happened. Other students started coming forward. LGBTQ+ students who had been hiding, who had been afraid to be themselves, who suddenly felt like they had permission to be honest about who they were. Teachers started having conversations about inclusivity and acceptance. Parents started questioning the assumptions they'd been making about sexuality and gender. The town of Millfield didn't change overnight. But something shifted. Something fundamental changed in the way people talked about these issues, in the way they treated people who were different. And it all started because Alex Thompson decided that he wouldn't stay silent. A few weeks later, Alex went back to visit Harrison. The old man answered the door with a smile that seemed to light up his entire face. "I read your essay," Harrison said. "Your mother gave me a copy. I must have read it a dozen times." "What did you think?" Alex asked. "I think you're braver than I ever was," Harrison said. "I think you're the person I should have been. I think Michael would be very proud of you." And for the first time in 30 years, David Harrison wept. Not tears of guilt or regret, but tears of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, his silence hadn't been the final word. Hope that maybe, through Alex and his mother and all the people who were beginning to speak up, Michael's death might lead to something good, something meaningful, something that could change lives. That night, Alex sat with his mother in their small apartment, and they looked at the photograph of Michael together. His mother told him stories about their friendship, about the dreams Michael had had, about the person he might have become if the world had been kinder, if people had been braver, if silence hadn't been so deadly. "I'm going to start a support group at school," Alex said, "for LGBTQ+ students, for anyone who feels like they don't fit in, who feels like they can't be themselves." His mother squeezed his hand. Michael would have loved that. And as Alex looked at the photograph of his mother's best friend, he made a silent promise to the boy who had died so many years ago. "I won't let your death be meaningless. I won't let your story be forgotten. I will be the voice you didn't have. I will be the ally you needed. I will make sure that no one else has to suffer the way you did." It was a promise he would spend the rest of his life keeping. 3 weeks after the publication of his essay, Alex stood in the empty cafeteria after school, arranging chairs in a circle. He'd gotten permission from the principal to use the space, though he could tell she was still uncomfortable with the whole thing. She'd suggested he call it a diversity and inclusion group, rather than specifically an LGBTQ support group. But Alex had politely declined. If they were going to do this, they were going to do it honestly. By 4:15 p.m., 12 students had shown up. Some he recognized from his classes. Others were faces he'd never seen before. Students from different grades and social circles who had apparently been waiting for permission to exist openly at Millfield High. Alex's heart raced as he looked around the circle. These were real people, with real struggles, with real courage. Thank you all for coming, Alex began, his voice steadier than he felt. I know this took guts. I know that showing up here in public is a risk. So first, I want to establish some ground rules. What's said here stays here. No gossip, no spreading information about who's here or what anyone shares. We're creating a safe space. A girl in the front row raised her hand. Her name was Sarah Chen. No relation to Michael, as far as Alex knew, though he made a mental note to ask her later. What's the point of this group? She asked. I mean, I'm glad it exists, but what are we actually going to do here? I think we're going to support each other, Alex said. We're going to talk about our experiences, our fears, our hopes. We're going to remind each other that we're not alone. We're going to figure out how to navigate this town, this school, this world, while being true to ourselves. That sounds nice in theory, said Marcus, a junior with an intense expression. But in practice, this town is hostile. My parents don't even know I'm here. If they found out I was in an LGBTQ+ group, they'd pull me out of school. I know, Alex said. And I'm not going to pretend that this is going to magically fix everything. But I think it helps to know that other people are going through the same thing. I think it helps to not feel completely alone. Over the next hour, the students shared their stories. Some had already come out to their families and were dealing with rejection or conditional acceptance. Others were still closeted, living double lives, terrified of discovery. One girl, Jessica, talked about attempting suicide the previous year because she couldn't bear the weight of hiding who she was. Another boy, David, talked about his strict religious family and the constant message that being gay was a sin. As Alex listened, he thought about Michael Chen. He thought about how Michael had had no one to talk to, no support group, no community of people who understood what he was going through. He thought about how different things might have been if Michael had had this. Just this simple circle of chairs, these 12 teenagers willing to be honest about their struggles. I want to tell you about someone, Alex said when there was a lull in the conversation. Someone who should be here with us, but isn't. His name was Michael Chen. He was a student at Millfield High in 1989. He was brilliant, kind, and gay. And he killed himself because he couldn't bear the weight of hiding who he was, because the people around him, including adults who should have known better, chose silence over support. He told them Michael's story. He told them about the fear, the isolation, the way that silence had been deadly. And he told them about his mother, about how she had tried to be there for Michael, but hadn't been able to save him. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand why we're here. Alex continued. We're here because Michael deserved better. Because every person in this circle deserves better. Because no one should have to die, because they're afraid to be themselves. By the end of the meeting, several students were crying. Jessica came up to Alex afterward and hugged him without saying anything. She didn't need to say anything. Her hug said everything. Over the next few weeks, the support group became a fixture at Millfield High. More students joined. They organized a pride flag to hang in the cafeteria, which was quickly taken down by the administration, but then put back up by sympathetic teachers. They started a social media account to share resources and information. They began planning a pride event for the spring. But not everyone was happy about the group's existence. One afternoon, Alex found his locker vandalized with hateful slurs. His car got keyed in the parking lot. Anonymous messages appeared on his social media accounts, telling him he was going to hell, that he was a pervert, that he should kill himself. The harassment was intense, but it also had an unexpected effect. It galvanized the school community. Teachers started speaking out against the harassment. Other students, straight students, started showing up to support the LGBTQ+ group. The principal, perhaps feeling pressure from the community, issued a statement condemning the vandalism and harassment. And then something remarkable happened. The local newspaper ran a story about the support group. The reporter, a woman named Jennifer Walsh, who had clearly done her research, wrote about Michael Chen's death, about Alex's essay, about the support group that had grown out of it. The article was sympathetic and nuanced, and it reached far beyond Millfield High. People started calling the school, asking about the group. Parents of LGBTQ+ students reached out to Alex, thanking him for creating a space where their children felt safe. Local organizations offered to send speakers to the school. A local therapist offered to volunteer her time to help facilitate the group. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source. One afternoon, Alex's mother came home from work with a strange expression on her face. "I ran into Chief Garrett at the hospital today," she said carefully. Alex's stomach dropped. Chief Garrett, Tommy's father, the man who had driven Michael to his death through his cruelty and rejection. What did he want? He wanted to apologize, his mother said. He said he'd read the newspaper article about the support group, and it had made him think about what happened with Michael. He said he'd spent 30 years telling himself that he'd done the right thing, that he was protecting his son from making a terrible mistake. But now he realizes that he was just being cruel. Did he say anything about Tommy? Alex asked. He said Tommy is living in Portland with his husband, his mother said. They've been together for 15 years. And Chief Garrett said he finally understands that Tommy's happiness is what matters, not his own expectations or fears. Alex didn't know what to say. The idea of Chief Garrett, the man who had set in motion the chain of events that led to Michael's death, finally understanding what he'd done. It was almost too much to process. He asked if he could come to one of your support group meetings. His mother continued. He said he wants to understand what you're doing, wants to support it. I don't know if that's a good idea, Alex said slowly. Some of the students might not feel safe with him there. I agree, his mother said. But I think you should consider it. Not for his sake, but because it might help him understand what he did, what the consequences of his actions were. And maybe, just maybe, it could help him become an ally instead of an enemy. Alex thought about it for several days. He discussed it with the core group of students who had been there from the beginning. In the end, they decided to give Chief Garrett a chance, but with conditions. He would come to a meeting, but he would listen more than he spoke. He would acknowledge what he'd done and apologize. And if any student felt uncomfortable, he would leave. The meeting was tense. Chief Garrett, now in his 70s, looked smaller than Alex had expected, diminished by age and regret. He sat in the circle of chairs and listened as students shared their stories. When it came time for him to speak, he stood up. "I owe all of you an apology," he said, his voice shaking. 30 years ago, I made a choice that had devastating consequences. I was afraid. Afraid for my son, afraid of what people would think, afraid of a lot of things. And instead of dealing with my fear, I lashed out. I hurt people. I contributed to the death of a young man who deserved so much better. He paused, and Alex could see tears streaming down his weathered face. I can't undo what I did. I can't bring Michael Chen back. But I can try to do better. I can try to be an ally to people like you. I can try to make sure that what happened to Michael doesn't happen to anyone else. After the meeting, several students approached Chief Garrett to talk to him. Some were angry, and he listened to their anger without defensiveness. Others were more forgiving, and he accepted their forgiveness with humility. By the end of the evening, something had shifted. Chief Garrett wasn't absolved of his guilt. He shouldn't be. But he had taken a step toward redemption, toward understanding, toward change. As Alex drove home that night, he thought about the butterfly effect. How one small action could create ripples that spread outward in ways you couldn't predict or control. His essay had led to the support group. The support group had led to the newspaper article. The newspaper article had led to Chief Garrett's awakening. And who knew what would come next? Who knew how many lives would be changed by this chain of events? He thought about Michael Chen, about the boy who had died so many years ago. He wondered if Michael could see what was happening now, if he could understand that his death, tragic as it was, had ultimately led to something meaningful, something that was helping other young people survive and thrive. When Alex got home, he found his mother sitting on the couch with a cup of tea. She smiled when she saw him. "How did it go?" she asked. "It was good," Alex said, sitting down beside her. "It was really good. I think Chief Garrett finally understands what he did. I think he's going to try to be better." His mother reached over and squeezed his hand. "Michael would be proud of you, Alex. I'm proud of you." "I'm just doing what you taught me to do," Alex said. "I'm using my voice. I'm standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves." "That's all any of us can do," his mother said. "That's all we've ever been able to do." And as they sat together in the quiet of their small apartment, Alex felt something that he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that change was possible. Hope that one person, with courage and determination, could make a difference. Hope that Michael's death wouldn't be the end of his story, but the beginning of something new. Something better. Something that would help countless other young people find the courage to be themselves. The support group continued to grow. By the end of the school year, it had over 30 members. They organized a pride event that drew hundreds of people from the community. Local businesses put up pride flags. The school added LGBTQ+ history to the curriculum. Teachers started using inclusive language in their classrooms. It wasn't perfect. There was still harassment, still bigotry, still people who didn't understand or accept LGBTQ+ people. But there was also change. There was also progress. There was also hope. And it had all started with one teenager deciding that silence was no longer an option.